My name is Lars Benyon, and my research was on understanding gaming in high school boys with ADHD. Okay. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and usually what that entails is problems with inattention and hyperactivity, so not being able to focus or being able to focus on too many random things at once, which can cause problems. Past research has demonstrated kind of a comorbidity of ADHD and video games. So components of video games have been seen to be more attractive to people with ADHD than to people without it, just regular people. Another reason I decided to specifically pursue this is because I'm a person with ADHD, and I also enjoy playing video games in my free time. And finally, I've seen through past research that internet gaming disorder has been on the rise. And while I'm not studying specifically addiction, it is interesting to look at the connection between ADHD individuals and video games. So possible effects of ADHD tend to be time management issues, socialization issues, and general lack of control of personal responsibility. So the reason why this is important to study is because the data could be helpful for not only researchers who are trying to go deeper into the field of ADHD and gaming, but also psychologists who may want to create more better therapeutic resources for people who are struggling with either gaming addiction or ADHD. There is a research gap concerning high school boys, specifically 14 to 18 with ADHD, because I just wasn't able to find any research which was specifically studying them on this topic. And it's important because we could also develop, as I said before, better therapeutic treatment, and it would also create a stronger foundation for research in the future about this connection. So for my literature review, I found a study done in 2021 by Laura Massi and other researchers. They decided to study children aged 4 to 12, and they used 3 groups for their research. So they had a ADHD group, a clinical control group, and a community control group. And basically what a clinical control group is a group of people who do not have ADHD, but they do have other mental conditions, while a community control group are people who are perfectly mentally healthy and they don't have anything. And in this study, the parents actually were the ones that completed the questionnaires, and they completed 3. So it was a socio-demographic, an SDQ, and a questionnaire about attention and computers. So the results of this were that the ADHD group indicated a higher playtime. So on average, they just played more video games per week, measured by hours, than people without it of their same age group. And the p-value was actually 0.002. And the p-value for data to be significant is usually anything less than 0.05. So they found a correlation also with behavioral issues such as hyperactivity and inattention, and also just emotional issues in general. And finally, they mentioned other studies which also support this theory, which I'll go into further during the discussion and conclusion. Why does this relate to my research though? Well, I am also utilizing a questionnaire for my research. I will also be using an ADHD group and a control group, although I won't be using a clinical control group, I'm just using 2. And I'll be measuring also the amount of time played between the 2 groups. And I'm also, as a side measurement, looking at the behavioral issues that may be caused by how much people decide to play video games. But some differences are that I am addressing the research gap of boys 14 to 18, while they were addressing, as I said before, 4 through 12. I'm using a multiple choice rather than a Likert scale. I didn't find the Likert scale to be necessary for this type of research. And so yeah, I'm combining the clinical control group and the community control group. So in the non-ADHD group, there may be people who have other mental disorders, and there may be people who are perfectly healthy. Finally, I'm also measuring the frequency of how often students play video games per week, which this research was not measuring. So my research question is, do high school boys participate in gaming differently than those without it, and how so? So how are their habits different from those who do not have ADHD? So for my method, I decided to use a convenience sample, which means I didn't really mind how many people answered the survey, because in the end I was going to divide the ADHD and non-ADHD participants and measure the differences between them. As I said before, I'm using a multiple choice questionnaire, and it was distributed to every student in the school. This is an anonymous questionnaire, which means I did not need to fill out an IRB, or I did not need them to fill out an IRB. And the participants were again differentiated based on whether or not they have ADHD and not anything else. So they were asked about the number of hours they spend per week playing video games, the frequency of how many times per week do they play video games, and the degree to which they think gaming affects their personal responsibilities and their ability to complete things they need to do. So for my results, the ADHD group were 5% more likely to play video games more than 3 times a week. They were 5.6% more likely to play for more than 2 hours per session. And then they were 6.2% more likely to play for more than 3 hours per session. Some side things were that I found 13.4% were more likely to play video games alone if they had ADHD. And when I say alone, I mean they weren't playing locally with somebody like in the same room as them, and they also wouldn't play virtually with other individuals like online or anything. Finally, I found that 4.2% of ADHD students were more likely to have their personal responsibilities affected by their gaming. So for my discussion, I found that these findings aligned with the previously mentioned study by Masi and Abadi in 2021. So they found that more playtime among those with ADHD was existing, which I also found. They found an increased lack of self-control among ADHD gamers, specifically for me when it comes to personal responsibility, and increased antisocial behavior among ADHD gamers. It's important to note that the antisocial behavior I found was specifically within video games, not in the real world. And they also, in their research, suggested that this could connect to early childhood. And they cited a study by Poulain and Vogel, which supports this theory about the connection to childhood. And they found a correlation between gaming in one's childhood and later issues with their behavior, such as emotional issues, antisocial behavior, and so on. Finally, I found a study by Amnon Jacob Suissa, who identified social difficulty as a risk factor for heavier gaming. So it's important not to assume that the gaming is causing the antisocial behavior, but it could actually be the other way around. That was in 2014. The limitations of my research were firstly that I was relying on self-reported data. Some of the studies that I mentioned in this presentation were relying on the parents reporting the data because the kids were younger, but since these people were in high school, I decided to use self-reported data. I decided not to go for an interview approach or anything like that because I feel like that might allow for even more bias due to the fact they may not want to feel embarrassed about certain things like not being able to complete personal responsibilities or so on. Another issue was the small sample size of 100 students. This obviously increases the margin of error due to just the smaller number of people participating, and it makes it harder to identify differences between the group of people with ADHD and the group of people without it. So I'd say that future studies should work to eliminate these factors by not only having more people, but finding a way not to use self-reported data, because personal biases can always skew research results. So in conclusion, on average, high school boys aged 14 to 18 with ADHD were found to play video games for a longer period of time per session. They experienced a heavier lack of personal responsibility due to their gaming habits and their video game use, and they play in a more antisocial environment, not only locally but also virtually compared to those without it. That's it.